Hard to believe I'm finally here. I'm about to set foot on the Appalachian Trail for the first time in probably about 20 years. And I'm right by the highway, Route 9 here in Vermont. And it feels a little bit like hallowed ground to be here on the Appalachian Trail, and I'm sure you probably can't hear a thing. But it's a cold day. It's beautiful. It's 36 degrees here at the trailhead and supposed to get colder throughout the night. So I'll probably have to record a new intro once I get away from the water and the highway, but excited to finally be here.
The thermometer in the car read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and my sleeping quilt was rated for 20. I crossed the river and began to climb, and climb, and climb. 700 feet of elevation gain in 7/10 of a mile. The trail was big boulders, and pockets of snow and ice began to appear. After that climb, the trail continued to ascend, but much less steeply as the trail meandered through the forest. Here, the snowpack was significant. 4 inches, then 6, 8, and 12 inches of hard-packed, icy, crusty, rotten. I reached the Melville Nauheim Shelter after just 1.4 miles of hiking, which took nearly 2 hours, less than 1 mile per hour. And here at the shelter, I noticed that the temp had already dipped to 31 degrees. My mesh sneakers were now wet from breaking through the snow. I hung my hammock and tarp and laid my sleeping gear inside. I hung a line for my bear bag and then sat down to fire up my stove inside the shelter for dinner. While I waited for dinner to soak and cook, I pulled out the notebook that is stored in the shelter for hikers to sign in. I wrote a short entry and then went back to last summer's entries to see if I could find any of the names of hikers I had followed on YouTube last year. I had no luck. By the time I ate, I was getting cold. I'd failed to bring a pair of gloves, and I'd also forgotten to grab the spare socks that were sitting safely in my car. After dinner, I packed my food bag and raised it into the trees. By 8 p.m., I was tucked inside my hammock and getting cozy. My sock feet were still wet, though, and getting colder. I pulled the insoles out of my shoes, knowing that they would freeze solid if I'd left them outside, and I tucked them between the hammock and the underquilt, knowing even if they didn't dry, at least they'd remain soft and pliable for the morning. I nestled in and noted that the temp had already fallen to 26 and was only getting colder. I wanted to try to sleep, but I also knew I needed to go to the bathroom before bed, so I reluctantly slipped into my wet shoes and stepped outside, and that's when I saw it. The sky was brilliant red, oranges and yellows to the west. I pulled out my phone and shot 2 or 3 images of the sunset. I did my business and crawled back into the hammock. Feet wetter now than before. I sat cross-legged in the hammock, letting my body heat warm my feet, and before long, I was feeling a little better. I stretched my legs and laid back and began drifting to sleep. Until 9:40, when I found myself awake for no good reason. I was cold and a bit anxious about the dropping temperatures, and then I saw a flash of light hit my tarp. Light? I was the 5th hiker since November to sign the logbook. There was light, followed by voices, and a moment later it was confirmed. At least 2 other hikers were pulling into camp at nearly 10 p.m. Once their light hit my tarp, they instantly got really quiet and then settled into the shelter barely 30 feet from my hammock. I could hear them, but faintly. It was clear that they were making every effort to be respectful. Had it not been 26 degrees, I might have spoken up. I might have tried to make friends, but it was not meant to be. After 15 or 20 minutes, I couldn't hear them at all and drifted back to sleep. The moon was bright, very bright. All night long I'd wake every couple of hours and I could see the shadows of the trees on the snow all around me. Each time I woke, it was colder than before. The underquilt was shifting and my shoulder was ice cold. I'd readjust and go to sleep for another couple of hours. After several 2-hour naps, my alarm went off. It was now just 22 degrees on the mountain, and I quickly set to work putting on my long johns and pulling my warm, damp socks back onto my feet. I stuffed my insoles back into my shoes and stepped out into the icy cold. My guests were still asleep, and I wanted to show them the same respect that they had shown me just 8 hours earlier, so I tried to be quiet as I started tearing down camp. The snow was super crunchy, though, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Every step seemed to echo. I made my way to my bear bag and lowered it. I pulled out a homemade granola bar and stuffed it into my pocket. It was way too hard to eat before letting it warm up from my pocket for a while. I returned to the hammock and began stowing away its tarp and its sleeve and packing it up. My gloveless fingers began to burn and tingle and finally go numb in the course of under a minute. I had to warm them, even if it meant taking a little longer to get out of camp. So I stuffed my hands in my pants and pressed my thumbs and fingers into my skin. It still took 3 or 4 minutes to bring them back to feeling. I knew I'd need to keep my hands in my pockets at the start of the hike until I was being active enough to pump warm blood back into my fingertips. So I broke down my trekking poles and attached them to the outside of the pack and have finished breaking down camp.
Well, it looks like we're going to go through a rock today, I guess. So let's do this. As I almost slip and fall on my butt. But hey, look at that view. Welcome to 7 a.m. on the Appalachian Trail here in Vermont, April 8th, 2023.
It took just 50 minutes to navigate the same 1.4 miles back to the car. At 7:30, I was inside with the engine running, heated seats on high. I checked the thermometer on my bag, and it had warmed up to a balmy 30 degrees. I tapped it once more to see the low temp overnight, 19. It was more than 10 degrees cooler than I had expected. It was officially my coldest night ever on trail. And while I hadn't exactly been warm, nor completely prepared, I had survived the evening, then put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking lot on Vermont Route 9, headed east. I'd done it, a night on the Appalachian Trail. The sun was shining bright, not a cloud in the sky, and I felt amazing. I pulled the granola bar out of my pocket and ate breakfast as I drove, somewhere around the New York State border. My hunger, in more ways than one, was sated.